Hello and welcome. This is another video showing just how easy it is to confirm that the Earth is indeed spherical, and to demonstrate that objects do disappear below the horizon, either as they get further away or as your angle of observation changes. So this morning I went to Aberdour on the Fife coast and took some video. And this is the location from which the video was shot at the highest elevation, and I then moved from this elevation down the steps you're about to see towards the little light beacon that you can see in the distance there. There's two light beacons, one used and one disused, and so we're changing our elevation and taking video from different heights above sea level. Now let's have a look at what I was able to see. So a quick look on Google Earth just to look at the location. I was in Aberdour looking towards North Berwick. Aberdour is a little village on the coast, on the Fife coast of the Firth of Forth. I've overlaid an Ordnance Survey map here just to confirm the elevations for the various points where I took some video. So there's a little lighthouse down at 5 meters, and then above sea level, and then there's a little hill and some steps up the hill, and I was located, the high point was between the 25 and 20 meter contour lines there, with my camera on this little knoll and on a tripod. I took another video from just above the 15 meter contour line, and another video from next to that little light beacon there, which is the 5 meter contour little line doesn't perfectly line up with where that lighthouse is, but that's where the 5 meters is, 5 meters above sea level. And then I took some more video from lower down, and we're looking across towards the islands off the East Lothian coast near North Berwick. So we have the island of Fidra. The red and green lines here indicate the line of sight from the high elevation of 24 meters and the low elevation of about 3 meters. So they're very, very similar lines of sight, not quite identical. And there's the Bass Rock, again with an Ordnance Survey map overlaid just to confirm the elevation of the Bass Rock. So the video actually starts with the camera zoomed in on Berwick Law here, and I'm at the highest elevation, and you can see these marker buoys. They'll crop up a bit later. This is the land north of Berwick Law, and there's the first island. This is Lamb, then Craigleith, Bass Rock behind, and Fidra just to the left with the lighthouse. So this is the shot taken from the highest point. Now the weather was really closing in from behind me, and the wind was blowing quite strongly, and I knew that I hadn't got much time to get these shots before everything was going to become really quite unpleasant. So a quick 360 here, just to show you the location. You saw the two lighthouses, one disused. The camera is level with that highest point, which is 25 meters, and I've used 24 meters just to allow for maybe I'm a little bit lower than that highest point. So there's the view out to the estuary. you can see the lighthouse that's in use on the left hand side. That'll feature just a little bit later. And now we're going to head down the steps to the step that's got quite a large puddle on the top of it. Large in area, it's not very deep, it was only half an inch deep. So that first sort of step with a puddle on it is where we're going to put the camera for the second shot. And I estimated that we'd come down probably about 7 meters or so from the high point. I couldn't take shots from any lower down because those bushes and the lighthouse there get in the way. So this I decided was a good point to get a next shot. So we're zooming in, using Berwick Law as a kind of target to start with. And once the camera's zoomed in and the tripod is sort of positioned reasonably well, it was windy, as I say. I started to pan across. You see the marker buoys again, and still see most of this land that lies to the north of Berwick Law. As we scroll across, we see that Lamb has got a little bit smaller, as has Craigleith, and Bass Rock and Phaedra don't look very much different to how they looked in the previous shot. A little bit, but not very much. So zooming back out to try to get the next shot, the next two locations in quite quickly, because the wind was really getting up and the weather was closing in from behind me. So we're going to continue on down the steps here. You might sort of see that the trees and little bushes and the lighthouse are going to get in the way of any further shots from these steps. So we're going down towards the old disused lighthouse that you can just see in the corner of the screen there. There's not much to say here. Sorry if it's making anybody seasick, but I wanted to do this as a continuous shot so that nobody would argue that these are all shots taken on different days with the tide at a different height or something of that sort. I wanted people to be able to see that all the stills, all the shots were taken on the same day at the same time. So this lighthouse here, this little beacon, is active, and we'll see that a little bit later. It got so dark, even though it was 11 o'clock in the morning, it got so dark that it actually it switched on. It has an automatic light sensor that switches it on when it gets dark enough. So walking down, there's a little tourist kind of signboard there, and a little bit of trackway. And on up, the next location that I was able to set the camera up and still see the horizon was next to the little disused beacon there that you can see in the picture. So when I got the camera set up next to the beacon there, it was really pretty windy. There was no protection at all from the wind, and you'll see the video. It's rather a lot of vibration, a lot of camera shake. Excuse me, I'm yawning here. I guess if I'm yawning, everybody else will be falling asleep or switch this video off by now, but never mind. So as I set the camera up here, you'll see the bush in front of where the camera is located is the twigs on the bush are moving around quite a lot, and you can see the waves on the water starting to sort of, the chop on the water starting to pick up. So quickly zooming in again onto Berwick Law, and visibility is still okay, still quite clearly see the Berwick Law and the islands with the naked eye. but obviously much clearer when zoomed in with the camera. So panning across again past the marker buoys that are now apparently resting on the horizon and not well in front of the horizon, which is interesting. And the camera's jumping around here. I was really getting blown about, but I decided to finish it off. Couldn't really see lamb at all from this elevation, and the Fidra and Craigleith had quite a different appearance to how they had looked from the higher two elevations. I had intended to kind of stop at this point, but I decided to go down to a lower point where the wind would be a little bit less strong because of the lighthouse, and these bushes and some rocks would offer just a little protection from this this westerly wind. So taking a bit of care here, there's quite a steep little wall to jump down, and then a little path through a little gully. It's pretty wet underfoot. And setting it up on this little bit of flat ground that is just in front of that is just rocks down to the sea. So we're at about 3 meters above sea level. I decided here the camera was not level at all, and so I moved it to get onto slightly more level ground, and you'll see that Burnt Island comes into shot there, but we're still in the same place. And zooming in on Berwick Law as before, and getting the camera height sorted out, and then panning across, and the marker buoys are now right on the horizon. The amount of land we can see north of Berwick Law is greatly reduced. There's no sign of a lamb at all, and then that little bit of land you can see there is the island of Craigleith with the Bass Rock and the top of the lighthouse on Fidra visible, but nothing else. So the whole of Fidra Island has disappeared, most of Craigleith has disappeared, and all of Lamb has disappeared. Now I pan back here and I move the camera around so you can see it's quite light skies here, and as we go past Edinburgh, and you can see Arthur's Seat there and Salisbury Crags, go back round the rocks behind me that were offering some protection from the wind, and the little light beacon. You can see the clouds behind there are looking a little bit grey and ominous, and we did indeed have some fairly heavy rain come in. It's a little bit brighter there to the north, but the darker weather was coming in. That's the Silver Sands beach, and this is where I stopped filming. So as I was walking back to the car, I noticed that the light beacon had actually become activated. It had got so dark, even though it was just 11 o'clock in the morning. There's that beacon flashing away. So the weather really was getting quite dark. The pictures don't really reveal that. So I've captured some stills from the video, and I won't go into too much detail about them. I think it's fairly obvious. So I'm presenting 4 stills on screen, one for 24 meter camera elevation, one 17, one for about 6 meters, and one for about 3 meters. And I think it's fairly obvious what these pictures show. I've also adjusted the levels in GIMP to further highlight that. So I'll leave these for you to look at and to consider. Just remember that for the 6 meter camera elevation, I was getting buffeted by the wind, and so it's a little bit out of focus. Also, bear in mind that the camera angle for the 24 and 17 meter pictures is pretty much identical, but it's a slightly different camera angle for the 6-meter picture and the 3-meter picture compared to the 24 and the 17. And so that explains why we have this little gap here, whereas the gap doesn't go down quite as far from this particular camera angle. I've done the same thing. So this is looking at the island of Phaedra and Bass Rock, and I've done the same thing looking at the island of Craigleith with Castle Talbot in front and a portion of Phaedra in front of it, and also the Bass Rock behind. And once again, I have made pictures with the levels enhanced a little bit, or adjusted a little bit at least, just to make it a little bit easier to pick out the various features, particularly Castle Talbot in front of Craigleith here. And we see that down at the 3-meter level, Craigleith has almost completely disappeared. The small black objects are seabirds, if you can't tell what they are. And finally, I've done the same thing for the lamb, and here the lamb is only visible at the 2 higher camera elevations. At the lower camera elevations, not visible at all. This is the island of Craigleith, which you can see in both these images here. And so we're just seeing the top of lamb in this 17-meter image. And then when we get down to 6 meters, we can still see part of the island of Craigleith. And there's no sign of lamb here or anywhere in the video. Please check out the video clip that you've already seen and confirm for yourself that we can't see the lamb, and likewise at 3-meter camera elevation. Just to remind you, at 3-meter camera elevation we saw Bass Rock and the very tip of Craigleith next to the Bass Rock. And this is the same images with the levels enhanced. Now, if you've seen my previous few videos about the wind turbines, then you'll know that the obvious explanation for what we're observing here is that we can't see portions of these islands from lower elevations because something is in the way. And the something that's in the way is the water. If you have an alternative explanation, I would love to hear it. But please don't just say it's aetherband. Please don't just say it's inferior miraging. Actually explain, preferably with some diagrams, exactly how this particular mechanism that you're invoking works to obscure our view of these islands in the Firth of Forth. The globe Earth explanation is very straightforward. The surface of the Earth is not flat, it is the surface of a sphere essentially, and when we get to low camera elevations, objects in the distance disappear below the horizon because the water between us and those objects is indeed following the curve of the Earth and getting in the way. It is obscuring our view of the islands in the distance. So quickly confirming the tide times and heights. This is for Phaedra. We can see that low tide occurred at 10:53 a.m. The video is shot at just about this exact time. So low tide, and the tide range here is 4.5 meters or so. And so if we add a couple of meters onto our elevation and a couple of meters onto our object heights, we will be accurate for the time of day. So I won't go into massive amounts of detail showing that these observations match the globe Earth predictions and do not match flat Earth predictions. But I have done a little check on Walter Bislin's curvature calculator. So using a camera elevation above actual sea level, I've added 2 meters here to take account the fact that it was low tide at the time the pictures were taken. Distance to the Fidra Lighthouse from the higher observation point, camera point, is 31.4 kilometers, and the focal height of the Fidra Lighthouse is 34 meters. That's 34 meters above above a mean high tide level. Really it's more like 38 meters above the low tide level, maybe even a bit more. But anyway, using these figures, I used 36 meters here, not 38 for the height. So I'm favoring flat Earth with that. We see that the flat Earth prediction is that the horizon line should be more than halfway up the total distance between the bottom of the island and the top of the lighthouse, or the focal point of the lighthouse. This means that what we should be seeing is the horizon up somewhere here near to the point where the tower protrudes from above the rest of the building of the lighthouse. And the horizon is down here. And we should see the whole of the island and the lighthouse. And perhaps we can see most of it, but I don't think we can say for sure that we are seeing all of it. Remember, it's low tide, and the land bridge between Castle Talbot and the rest of Fidra is not visible in our picture. Coming to the lowest elevation, so 5 meters above actual sea level, or 3 meters above mean sea level, the distance to Fidra Lighthouse is a little bit closer at 31.2 kilometers. And the focal height of Fidra Lighthouse is 34 meters, and once again I've made it 36 meters. The flat Earth prediction is that we should still see the whole of the island. By now, the horizon line should have dropped down to being, if we look at the left-hand picture here, the horizon line would be down here somewhere. It's still not probably at the position that it's actually at in that picture. But the horizon line here is way up above, near to the very top of the lighthouse. And that's exactly what we predict on a globe Earth, with just the top of the lighthouse poking up above the waves and the whole of the rest of the structure being below the horizon. So once again, our observation in reality matches what would be expected on a spherical Earth and does not match what we expect or predict on a flat Earth. I'd also like to point out that I've made a similar observation on other days when it was closer to high tide. So here are some of the shots, and from the low camera elevation of about 3 meters above mean sea level, only the top of Bass Rock is actually visible. And in a moment you'll see a shot from the higher elevation. So this was a shot from the low elevation on this particular day, and from the higher elevation you can see Fidra and Bass Rock and Craigleith. So as always, thanks for watching, and please like, subscribe and click the bell if you liked it and want to see more videos, and even consider becoming a patron.